Abhishek, welcome back.
Thanks, man.
We had a long
Happy
1 hour
to be.
session about your journey and things you learned along the way, and you had some nice tips that you shared with people about how they can, kind of kickstart their journey in this field of sound engineering. So you spoke of mixing, and that you said at one point was big, and you moved out, freelanced, and things like that. So what is
Right.
exactly this mixing? Can you explain that term with an example?
So mixing, I think in the most layman's terms, like if anyone who has no idea whatsoever about mixing, like when I meet people outside my field, when I meet them for the first time, they ask me, what do you do? If I tell them I'm a mix engineer, most of them who vaguely heard the term mixing, they'll connect it to DJs, mixing music and stuff. But obviously that is not what I do, or what any mix engineer does for that matter. Mixing essentially, in the most simplest of terms, is when you click a photo, you Photoshop it. So this, and similarly, mixing is Photoshop for songs. When you have a track, you've recorded a track, you have arranged it, you've added drums and guitars and synths and all kinds of things to create a vibe. A mix engineer's job is to just take that, firstly, clean it up, make it sound more listenable, make it sound aesthetically pleasing to the ears in terms of balancing out all the tracks together, making sure everything sounds right, everything has a certain depth to it, uh, understanding the vibe of the song and sonically treating it in a way to replicate that vibe. That for me is mixing. So yeah, so when I start a track, I don't just load the track and the first thing I start is just to start opening plugins blindly, which I used to do when I started off. The most important, yeah, which is the most, I think the most important thing to do is um, listen to the reference. I'm sure a producer will have a reference mix, or the composer will have a reference mix that they have given or that they have created. It's very important for you to listen to that, understand the vibe in terms of balance as to what they are trying to convey. Because the end of the day, you are a facilitator. It's as much as your name is attached to the product or to the song. I think it's really essential for you to not entirely just put your own take into it. Your job is to understand the composer's take and the composer's vision in terms of the song, and your job is to just carry it and just make it better. My thought initially on this when I started off was, man, any track that I get, I'm just going to like give it my color and just change the sound and do this and that and blah blah blah. And the number of times my mixes have been rejected back then, it's not even funny. And it used to confuse me, because according to me, I felt what I've done sounds fantastic. And maybe it did in a certain way, but that is not the vibe that they were looking for. So slowly, the more you work with clients, the more you interact with different people, composers and producers, etc. Sure, there'll be a group of people who don't know what the hell they're talking about. There'll be a group of people who are way more experienced than you. So they know exactly what they're talking about. So your idea is to also learn your client, understand who they are and where they're coming from. And yeah, I mean, understand their balance. And your job is to just replicate that, just to make it better. Maintain the same balance, maintain the same feel. Tonally, don't change a lot of things. Just enhance, just remove all the dirt that probably they don't hear, but you hear. So as a mix engineer, I feel a mix engineer's ears should be a lot more sharper than the composer and the producers. That is essentially your job as a mix engineer. So that's how I would start.
So, what is your approach towards mixing a song? What is your philosophy whenever you take on a project?
So yeah, my philosophy is just to understand that person's journey. Like for example, if the song is, let's assume it's a R&B number, it's an R&B song, and it has a very mellow, sensual vibe to it, which is actually a very recent song that I had done. If it, very simple example in that, if it has a kick, maybe the kick doesn't have to be too punchy. It needs to have a very mellow, rounded tone to it. But obviously you want to make it punchy because you're trying to make a mark as an engineer to show them that this is what I can do with your sound. But that is not really the right answer. The right answer is to create and design sound in a way so that you can explain that journey better. So if the song is mellow, you shouldn't make anything too punchy or to make any transients stand out. You need to round them off. You need to make them a little more mellow. You need to play with more dynamics if possible, and listen to the song a couple of times. So my approach is, when I get a song, I first listen to their rough mix 10, 15 times. I'll probably go out for a drive, just play that in the car. So I get my body used to it. It's not just listening to the song. It's your body getting used to, your system getting used to the sound, the original mix. Once I do that, now that has kind of got into my muscle memory. Then when I'm treating, when I start the mix, I'll try and do a better job. I'll maybe try to make it wider, maybe create some more space in terms of the balance, clean out certain elements so that every element has its own pocket so that it can talk out of. That is what I would do, but I would not change the balance too much unless the composer or the producer tells me, "Ki, bro, I want you to just do your thing on it." Then I'll just do a save as and just go all out and maybe compare the two. So that is how I would start. My approach would be that.
So Abhishek, this is what you said, that this is how you mix a song.
Yeah.
What do you do when you have to mix a background score, like you said you like doing, and how do you mix a musical, when you're on stage or doing a live show, because that's what also you do. So
Yeah.
what is the difference in these three things?
So technically, I'll start off by comparing mixing a song versus mixing a background score. Mixing a song, obviously, I mean, I've just explained that. EQs and compressions and blah blah blah, whatever. The major difference between mixing a song versus mixing a score is a score is way more dynamic than a song is or should be in terms of a mix. Because scores, primarily, I mean, I'm not saying all scores are, but most of the scores that you listen to are very orchestral. Orchestral music is extremely dynamic. If you listen to classical music, if you listen to major orchestras, or if you've been to an live orchestral performance, you will see how they just have these really soft parts and they just go into these massively loud portions of music. And you have to replicate that, because a score, like a song, is obviously, it's a melodic journey. It's a lyrical journey that the composer is trying to put out and express him or herself through. Background score is just a support. It's a musical support to a scene. So even though people have created fantastic themes through the decades, the essential job of scoring is to just enhance the scene. So if there's an emotional scene and if there's a score over there, the score's job is to just make sure that the scene gets a little more enhanced, it gets a little more color. Maybe people feel it a little differently. And I mean, that's what scoring does. So it's not essentially a song. So your job is to maintain those dynamics. Your job is to maintain that flow. Your job is to not make background scores that in your face unless there are parts where it's so heavily musical that it needs to be in your face. So yeah, those are the two main differences between mixing a song and mixing a score. Maintaining dynamics versus not maintaining so much of dynamics. Mixing live, like the most of the live mixes that I've done are mainly musicals. Like, I'm part of three musicals that are currently running, which is, one is Beyond Bollywood, which is more of a dance drama rather than a musical. There is Umrao Jan, which is a beautiful musical, and we were going to start another one called Disco Dancer, which, I mean, because of our current situation, we couldn't, but it will commence hopefully by the end of this year, if I'm not wrong. So mixing live, of course, is a whole other ballgame, because you can't undo things. You can't go back and try a couple of things, because everything is live. You can't experiment when there's a massive audience of 3,000 or 2,500 people watching you. So you obviously have rehearsals. You do your best to make sure that obviously you don't get feedback, because for musicals, the mics that I use for my actors, they're omnidirectional microphones. And I've explained this earlier. When you're recording, it's always nice to have a more controlled environment. However, in musicals, when actors talk or when actors are conversing, your job is to make it sound as natural as possible. So as a viewer or as a listener, when you're looking at the stage, you should feel that the actors are just talking to you directly. Like, it shouldn't sound like it's coming from two massive speakers on the side, because this isn't a concert. It's live stage. It's an intimate environment. It should sound as natural as possible. So when you have an omni microphone, I usually place it here on the head, or maybe if it doesn't work, maybe I place it here just below the cheekbone. So that also gives you a lot of resonance. But I mean, that's a whole other topic I'll discuss later. So when you do that, the mic is not right in front of your mouth. What that does is it gives you proximity effect. That is not what we want when we are mixing live. We don't want proximity effect. We want the voice to be as natural as possible. So that is one major thing. Of course, when I'm doing musicals there, I'm also like writing the music live. Like there's a live background score, which in this case has been composed by Salim Suleiman. And I mean, there's a lot of dynamics happening there. So I have to literally like write the fader live while the actors are saying their dialogues. So it's like I have like 3 or 4 faders, which are groups of dialogues, sound effects, music, and background score. So I literally write this while the show is going on. So I mean, mixing live is it's also fun, but it's very different than mixing a song, where you can just go back and forth and spend time, etc. Live is just you need to know the show beforehand, and you also need to you also need to um, be aware of troubleshooting. Like in case an actor forgets his or her line, or says an extra line, or improvises, you need to keep all of these things into account. You have to take them into account. So you have to always be prepared. When you're mixing a song in a controlled environment in a studio, you don't really have to care about all those things. So I mean, there are differences.
How can one become a better mix engineer? What are the certain tips that you would like to, kind of guide
Right.
beginners?
Um, how to become a better mix engineer? The number one thing, again, like I said, is just keep listening to everything that comes your way. Even if it's like shit Bhojpuri songs, to like badly mixed songs, to really good mixes, to electronic music, to classical music, to rap, to hip hop, electronic music, and try and find out the history. Like, for example, I recently got into hip hop because I have a lot of hip hop clients today that I'm mixing for. So I started, and I never grew up listening to hip hop. I was aware of the movement. I was aware of hip hop and rap. And of course, when Eminem became famous is when I started listening to rap. But before that, I really never listened to like early 90s hip hop and rap music, which I did much later. So when I started listening to Eminem, I started going back in time and I try to understand sonically the evolution of hip hop music. Similarly, if you listen to a background score today, like Hans Zimmer is like one of the biggest guys in the scene today. So if you listen to his score and if you like it, go back in time, listen to stuff by Ennio Morricone, listen to stuff by uh, what's his name? Thomas Newman's dad. Fantastic, amazing. Back in the days, in the 80s, I think he was composing, and John Williams, in fact, has learned a lot from him as well. Um, so go back in history, understand the sonic space of how things have evolved. Because of that, your ears will automatically get trained. So what I'm essentially trying to say here is just keep training your ears into absorbing all kinds of sounds, all kinds of music. Because when you listen, it's very simple. If you keep repeating something over and over again, it gets into your system. So if you listen to a song before mixing, like if you have a mix and if you have no frame of reference, listen to the closest mix in terms of genre, in terms of style, and keep listening to that, so that the idea of its sound, its balance, it just gets into your system. So when you're mixing, you don't really have to think much. You're just doing things to like reach that sound eventually. That is one. To be a better mix engineer, again, just keep mixing, keep mixing. You can't do your first mix thinking it's going to be incredible. So you can't also be insecure thinking ki, I don't have a lot of experience, so is my mix going to sound good? Never think about that. Never think about failures without having even done something. Keep doing stuff, keep mixing songs by people, or just take I'm sure there are these websites where they have stems, they have these recordings of old songs where you can just like practice mixing on. Just do that. I've done so many horrible mixes, but that's how you learn, because now you know what not to do. If you don't know what not to do, how will you do those things? So that's the second thing that I would say in terms of improving your skills as a mix engineer. And just like if you have questions, just talk to your peers, talk to your seniors. They have so much of experience that they can just impart, and they're waiting for people to ask you those kind of questions. So just don't stop asking questions. If you have doubts, just leave your ego and self-respect aside. Just talk to people, just ask them questions. And it's okay if you don't know a lot. I mean, a lot of people might also make you feel bad about not knowing something, but it's okay. I mean, eventually it's your journey, it's your life, it's your career, and you should be more concerned about yourself than about what people think of you. So yeah.
So you spoke of the first point that you just mentioned, that go back into history and listen to, the name you're
Mhm.
looking for is Alfred Newman, Thomas
Alfred
Newman's.
Newman, yeah. Oh, what a guy.
So So if there's also this school of thought that says boss जो हो गया आज का जो है उसके हिसाब से चल. Why do you want
तो
to
उसके हिसाब
sound
से
like
चल, but
why do you want to sound like a Lakshmikant Pyarelal mix? आज मैं 4 डफ लेके आया हूँ तो मैं आज के तरीके से और आज के माइक्रोफोन से उसको रिकॉर्ड करके प्लेस करूंगा. पहले एक ही माइक से 10 या 100 म्यूजिशियंस को रिकॉर्ड किया जाता था.
right.
So why should I follow those techniques? Why don't I go by today's technology and why not make the most of it? So how does one address such kind of concerns?
Okay, so fair enough. I mean, of course, technology has changed. Why use old techniques when we have new and better techniques? Fair enough, I agree. But it's very essential for you to know where these techniques have come from, why the sound has evolved, and from what it has evolved. Because imagine if tomorrow you get a song that you have to record or mix or whatever, and they tell you, "Ki because the situation is such." Say, if I have a film and maybe it's a biopic of, let's assume it's a biopic of Lakshmikant Pyarelal, and you're talking about the way they used to record and mix. So now, as a modern engineer or a modern producer, you have to replicate that sound. How will you replicate it if you haven't heard it in the first place? That's one very big example. Another one is, it's always nice to know where your roots are, where the roots of what you're doing is, because it just expands your knowledge into a lot of things. And and because of that, you can also use those sounds into today's production and mixing and so many other things. Like very recently, I was watching this YouTube video of a Toxic by Britney Spears. So they were talking about how the producer created those sounds. I mean, if you go back and listen to that song again, there's this one sample that has been taken from a 1970s Bollywood movie, like this high string orchestral like string sound. Um, I mean, if I could play it at some point, I'll play it. But listen to that song, listen to Toxic, and listen to the making of that song. So they've gone back and got that typical, that sharp, annoying little the group of violin sound that people have recorded back in the day. So I mean, it's also used for sampling. So now, if you don't know what that used to sound like, and if you're ignorant about it, how will you like create something new and different? Because everyone's pretty much sounding the same today. So the only way to go different is to also sometimes go back to your roots, maybe create those sounds and add it and enhance your current production. So it's always good. I mean, one thing my dad always used to tell me is, never be proud of your ignorance. Like a lot of people say, "Ki, acha mujhe to yehi aata hai, I'm just going to be good at this." I don't think that is really wise, because it's same thing with a singer. If a singer just knows how to sing but doesn't know how to sing in front of a microphone, or doesn't know how to sing in front of a certain microphone, or what a certain microphone is doing to his or her voice, how is he or she going to give their best? It's always good to know everything around you as much as possible. I mean, your brain isn't limited. It's as limited as as it's as limited as how you want it to be limited.
No, thanks for those examples and explaining why it is important to also know your history and history of sound also.
Right.
So, Abhishek, I mean, we have a lot of artists who come on the channel and say, "Sab suno, listen to everything," etc. So, I mean, coming to the reality of things, not everybody can spend the whole day listening to songs. मतलब थोड़ा time तक पकेगा भी वो. I mean, there's a limit to
No,
which you
I'm
can
not saying
listen
do
to.
it in one day. I'm not saying
Yeah,
do it in one day,
yeah.
but
So, what
we
else
all
do you
have.
suggest that today's young guys, should do so that their brain also evolves, grows, etc.? It can't be all the time listening to music, watching films. What else? Like,
Right.
I believe you're also a good cook. Or at least
Uh,
photographs show
uh,
that you made a good dish.
uh, uh.
Taste करेंगे तो पता चलेगा, but
I mean, see, again, like since you brought up the whole thing of cooking, I mean, cooking and mixing are so similar in terms of the philosophy of it. Like the right amount of ingredients, how much of what ingredient to put, how much to cook it, how less, like how much to fry something, how much to steam something. It's the same thing. Like mixing is exactly that. So anyway, I mean, I'm just digressing there, but yeah, I mean, see, there's another thing that I've noticed with this current generation is, I mean, I'm sounding like an old uncle, but it's kind of true that today people say that they're busy. They say that they are busier than they actually are. That's what I've noticed. And being busy is not essentially the greatest thing. It's about being productive. Being productive and being busy are two very different things. You can spend 18 hours inside a studio trying to mix a song, or you can spend 6 productive hours and do the same mix. So you have so much more free time. So time management is very, very important. The moment you create time for yourself is the moment you have more time to learn. The problem is today people are so insecure about showing the world through social media that man, I'm doing this, I'm so busy, Are, I got this gig, Are, I got that recording, and you always talk about the positives in your life. But you need to create some time, you need to find time, you need to design your day accordingly in such a way that you are being as productive, but you also are spending, you are creating more hours for yourself to learn. Because if you're constantly doing things, which is also great, I'm not saying don't do stuff, create. It's always a very positive thing to create music in terms of what I'm doing. But it's also important for you to just like lay back, just listen and absorb a lot of things also what's happening in the world. Because I remember there was a space of 6 months where I was constantly just mixing back to back. And I was completely clueless of what was happening outside. And so much had changed in 6 months. And I was like, man, I'm so out of touch. And then I started like dedicating at least 2 to 3 hours a day before I sleep to just like learn. I'll probably go on YouTube or I'll learn something about a plugin. I'll maybe watch a video of a mix engineer that I follow, or a song that I like that was mixed by a certain engineer, to understand his philosophy about how he approached that mix or how he mixed it based on the circumstances that he was given. So yeah, I mean, it's very easy to say ki I don't have time. Like everybody can tell you that, but I think it's a bullshit excuse. Like even the prime minister or the president of a certain country has time to spend with his or her family, and you're telling me you're busier than them. I don't believe that. You have to create time, be productive, work your ass off, but find time to learn also. If you don't learn, you're not really growing. That's what I believe.
Cool. Abhishek, on that note, thanks for sharing some pointers on how to become a better mix engineer and your philosophy towards mixing. I'm
Hmm.
sure a lot of viewers will be benefited by listening to and following your kind of, style, or at least the attitude or approach.
Yeah, I mean, that is the most important thing. See, technically, a lot of people are very knowledgeable. I know people who know the ins and outs of plugins way more than me. But eventually, when you listen to mixes, if you compare mixes, you know exactly where who's standing where. Because it's not really about, and this is something that I learned while I was working, even with, I remember when I started working with Vishal Shekhar. Vishal once told me this. He was like, man, just because you have this knowledge about Pro Tools and this does that and this tool and that tool, but you don't have to apply everything everywhere. You need to understand what is required. You need to understand the you need to support somebody's vision. That is the most important thing. So it's good to have technical knowledge, but it's more important to know what you're doing, more importantly than just your like a bookish knowledge that people have. Like a lot of people know so many things about making of this and how this circuit was used into that and all, and that's very fascinating. Even I get it, but it doesn't really help you in terms of when you're actually mixing a song, for example. So also get a little more creative than be all technical. I think a mix engineer is, it's very exciting to be a mix engineer for me, because I think I get to be 50% nerd and 50% like creative. Like I'm being technical and I'm also being creative, and not a lot of jobs have that. Some jobs are completely creative, some jobs are completely technical. I feel the job that I'm doing, which is mixing music, is a very good balance of both, as long as you understand the philosophy of it.
Abhishek, thank you so much for spending time with us, and
No
look forward
problem.
to doing more videos with you in the future.
Definitely, definitely. In fact, yeah, like I mentioned earlier, like a lot of people have been asking me to do this like a live mixing session. So I'll try and set up something quite soon, and we'll probably do something like that.
Great. Look forward to doing that, and thank you so much.
Awesome, man. Take care.
You
See you
too.
soon, man.
Bye bye.
Chalo.